Mic is on.
Mic is on. Yep.
Yeah.
Check it out one more time.
Ready?
Okay, let's do this.
Hi, I'm Prashantini.
And I'm Aishwarya. We are the co-hosts of Mimblewimble, the Harry Potter podcast.
So we usually have only the audio version of this podcast going out, but we decided to have a video version of it as well this time because we wanted to mix it up and because we also have a GoPro now.
Yeah, but that's not the only reason that we're having a video version of our podcast. A lot of our listeners have asked us about our process, how much work goes into creating every episode, how do we take notes, how do we figure out what conversations make the cut and what don't. So we figured that we would put up a unedited director's cut version of us recording an episode, and for the hardcore fans, of course, and a edited version of our discussion for our podcast fans.
Yes. So this is new for us as well. So we might have some hiccups, but we are going to power through it.
Yes. In this episode, we are going to cover the events of Chapter 19, The Servant of Lord Voldemort, and Chapter 20, The Dementor's Kiss. But before we dive into our discussion, let's just go over the summary to catch where I'm going with this. But before we dive into our discussion, let's start with the summary. Ding, ding, ding.
Ding, ding, ding. Okay. So this is going to be a mess. Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry.
Should I hold your book?
No, that's not the problem here. Cool, got it. After Snape reveals himself, he makes it clear that he has no... Sorry, I think we should give more context. After Snape reveals himself in the Shrieking Shack, he makes it clear that he has no intention of listening to Lupin or Sirius. I'll start again. After Snape reveals himself in the Shrieking Shack, he makes it clear that he has no intention of hearing Sirius' side of the story. His childhood humiliation takes over. He wants to give Sirius over to the Dementors, and Lupin too for supposedly helping Sirius. Harry, Ron and Hermione take matters into their own hands and knocks Snape out. To give Sirius a chance... Harry, Ron and Hermione take matters in their own hands and knock Snape out to give Sirius and Lupin a chance to explain. They reveal that Scabbers was in fact Peter Pettigrew and he faked his own death to get away from Azkaban and Sirius. Lots of questions that have been building up since the beginning of the book are answered in this chapter. How did Sirius escape? Why was Crookshanks so focused on killing Scabbers? Why was Scabbers losing his health? Who was the actual secret keeper? Why did Peter Pettigrew never try to kill Harry? How did Harry see the Grim during the Quidditch match? Or did he really see the Grim? And more. Harry decides that they should hand Pettigrew over to the authorities instead of killing him. But on the way to the castle, Lupin transforms into a violent werewolf because he had not taken the wolfsbane. On the way to the castle, Lupin transforms into a violent werewolf because he had forgotten to take the potion. Sirius turns into a dog to keep the werewolf Lupin away from the others, but Pettigrew uses the opportunity to attack Ron and Crookshanks and escape. The Dementors end up finding Sirius. Hermione and Harry try to save him. Sirius loses it, Hermione loses it, and Harry is about to be kissed by a Dementor when they are all saved by a mysterious Patronus. At this point, we are very glad that Harry's first kiss was not a Dementor.
Ooh. Thanks for that great last line. I love it.
Thank you.
You had an excellent point that a lot of important questions get answered in these chapters. The reason I want to talk about that is that it goes to... I think that these... okay. You had a great point about how... You made a great point about how a lot of important questions get answered in these particular set of chapters. And I think it just goes to show how well plotted this book is, because everything ties back to something else. Like everything. I know we'll go into greater detail as we talk about the events themselves, but I was constantly in the state of, oh my god, J.K. Rowling is a masterful plotter, because she's managed to tightly plot the book and use even very small details to build up to a unbelievable story.
Yeah, you're right. I think we talk a lot about J.K. Rowling's humor and generally her writing, her dialogues and everything. But what we don't give her enough credit for is her plotting. You're right, because it's not just in this book. If you see, if there are any unanswered questions in this book or in the first book, you'll see that all those are going to be answered in the seventh book. So I feel like, so I watched a lot of Brandon Sanderson's videos on writing recently, and he talks about plotting. He talks about bracketing. So he's like, in coding, just the way you close a bracket once you open it, it's the same thing with plotting. So when you open a question, readers are going to expect an answer by the end of the book. So open a question, close with an answer. Open a question, close with an answer. That's how you plot. And I feel like, I don't know if J.K. Rowling took any writing classes, but I feel like she's followed it perfectly. She's followed it in such a delightful manner, because it's not enough if you just close a bracket. It has to come with a punch. It has to make you really, it should be a really satisfying close. And I feel like the third book is one of the best plotted because of that. I feel like the endings are more satisfying and unexpected at the same time.
I agree with you. Also, what a delightful analogy, comparing plotting to writing code.
Yeah, I was also very, it felt like he was able to put that idea in my mind in a very firm way. Like, it was so easy to think of it. If you think of plot in such a way, it's just so easy to, it uncomplicates it. So it uncomplicates it basically.
I think it also really helps that both of us have some experience with trying to deal with code, if not write it ourselves. So
yeah. I think on some level everybody.
No, that's not true.
Okay.
Okay, let's get on with the events of this chapter.
Yeah, let me get my notes 1 second.
At the beginning of chapter 19, the servant of Lord Voldemort, Snape has just burst into the Shrieking Shack and whipped off his invisibility cloak, and everybody's really shocked to see him. He immediately launches into a monologue, and Snape understands something about monologues that Lupin didn't really get. It's just that when you're doing a good monologue, you better make sure all your points get out there in time before someone comes along to interrupt you. And Snape has some really good points.
I think most of his points showcase how strongly he feels about both Sirius and Lupin and James, more than actually advancing the plot over there.
I really admire J.K. Rowling's dialogue in this chapter, because I feel like with just a few lines she manages to effectively convey a complex relationship between Snape, Lupin and Sirius, and Lupin, Sirius and Pettigrew.
Yeah.
Like with just a few brief interactions, you're able to see the crux of their relationship.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It is also extremely, I can't honestly decide whether it's extremely convenient or inconvenient that Snape I can't decide if it's extremely convenient or inconvenient that Snape only hears Lupin's backstory and sees him with Sirius but doesn't hear the Peter Pettigrew bits.
It's like a series of misfortunes. For example, by the end of these two chapters, I was seriously sitting there and wondering, what did Lupin bring to the table? By just coming here, he endangered everything, and he put the whole plan into, Sirius might have gotten away, and he would have probably lived a happy life with Harry had it not been for Lupin. Because Lupin turning into the werewolf sets down like a series of events that lead to Peter Pettigrew leaving, and we know what happens later because we know where Peter Pettigrew went. So I feel like Lupin being there itself was like an unfortunate event, because whether or not he was there, I feel like Sirius would have found some way to convey that convey his backstory to the three of them.
I know, but Lupin being there lends some drama, and he's also an authority figure that the three of them trust. So Lupin being there, calmly processing the situation and explaining, really helps the three of them figure out and understand Sirius. I agree that eventually Sirius might have managed to like spit out his backstory, and they could have figured it out, but Lupin being there speeds up the process. And I agree, if Lupin hadn't come, the events of Dementor's kiss would have been very different.
Yeah.
Or
It may not have happened.
or if Lupin had remembered to take his potion, it would have been very, very different. So it is really unfortunate that Lupin is the reason that Harry connects with his godfather, but is also the reason that he can never really live with him.
Yeah.
Oh my god, that is so tragic. Lupin can't catch a break anywhere.
I think the Marauders just can't catch a break anywhere.
Yeah. It's really sad. Honestly.
It's very tragic. Their whole life is really tragic. It just makes me really sad every time they talk about the past, because it was like the past was filled with potential, and now it's all broken lives everywhere.
Which is the most tragic part, the potential.
Yeah.
But honestly, I feel like we're not discussing the real unsung hero in this story, which is Ron, who has somehow managed to hold on to Scabbers all this time, despite people like dropping so many bombs around him.
Yeah. Yeah. And Scabbers himself trying to escape.
Yeah, it is so impressive.
Yeah.
And Ron has a broken leg and he still managed to hold on to a squirming rat. I am very impressed with Ron.
Ron has like a very interesting set of I would say function, but let's get to that later, because I feel like we are getting ahead of ourselves. We should start by so one of the first things Snape says is, I saw you running along the passageway and out of sight. So I don't know if it comes early on when they talk about the Marauders map, but the Shrieking Shack is not a part of it, is it?
No, it's not.
Anything outside the school is not a part of it.
But you can, I think Fred and George mentioned that there is a passage that leads to the Shrieking Shack.
Yeah.
But you can only see the passage till it's in the Hogwarts grounds. Once you leave the Hogwarts grounds, you can't see what happens. So
it was very interesting to see that, I guess as soon as he saw Lupin running around the passageway, Snape would have just assumed that, okay, that passageway leads to the Shrieking Shack. Why would Lupin go there? He's the one probably he already had a suspicion that Lupin was the one helping Sirius. So he probably thought Sirius was in the Shrieking Shack. And he probably did not even realize that Harry, Ron and Hermione were there.
Yeah. And of course, Snape would have been familiar with this particular passage in the Shrieking Shack, because this is the same passage that he would have taken as a teenager.
Yeah. So the event she's talking about is basically where James Sirius. Sirius lures Snape into the Shrieking Shack, because Snape is very, nosy about what's going on with Lupin every month. And James saves Snape's neck at the nick of time. But I think Snape still manages to get a glimpse of Lupin, right?
Yes.
Because there's a very strong callback here. I don't know if it's intentional or not, because Snape says something like, if Dumbledore knows that you are not the tame werewolf, like the emphasis on tame, then he'll probably be very upset or something like that. It's almost as though that's what Dumbledore said. That's what Dumbledore told Snape in order for him to not talk about it to anyone. Like Lupin is a werewolf, but he's tame. You have to keep a secret.
I wonder. Yeah.
And that he throws it on Lupin's face like an insult. I didn't get the meaning of it, but it felt like the way it was constructed, it felt like there was a lot of backstory here.
I thought it was just Snape dehumanizing Lupin. Like, Lupin is always a werewolf in Snape's eyes. He can never be anything more.
That's very interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting point. That's probably it. I guess the word tame is not associated with humans too much.
Yeah.
So
referring to him not as a human being but as a beast, and worse, attaching the word tame to it makes him sound like a domesticated cat or...
Yeah, correct. Yeah, he probably meant it as a very straightforward insult. Then.
Yeah. Poor Lupin. He has to deal with a lot in these chapters.
Yeah. And obviously, once because Snape is in the Shrieking Shack, and he's talking about turning Sirius over to the authorities, to the Dementors. Uh, Harry makes an observation here. He says that it would have been impossible to say which face, Sirius's or Snape's, showed more hatred. I feel like that's all it takes for us to imagine so much about their backstory, and that's very interesting. I think we are delving too much into the way she writes, but I think these chapters are all about the masterful way in which J.K. Rowling writes.
I agree with you, and I know that we've been dwelling on it quite a lot. If you're going to say that we shouldn't talk so much about her sentences, I'm afraid half of my notes are basically out of the window at this point. I really admire this chapter because every sentence is really important, and she has made every sentence count.
Yeah.
So I really, even her descriptions are beautiful.
That's all I could think of when I was reading this, because when you're reading with a critical eye, which is what we try to do this time, because every other, like most of our previous reads, was all about the story. It was about what Harry was feeling. It was about what Sirius and Lupin were feeling. I think now we do observe that, but we also try to figure out how all this information was presented to us, because I guess, I don't know if we are nitpicky or that's what critical reading means, but the more we critically read it, the more we seem to like it.
Yes. Prisoner of Azkaban has always been my favorite Harry Potter book. And I was really worried when we started this season because I didn't want to read it from like this new perspective of being someone who discusses every chapter in great detail and dislike it. But I felt like my appreciation for it has only grown.
Yeah.
It is a fantastically plotted and well-written book. And I'm especially impressed with these last few chapters that we've been discussing, like Moony, Wormtail, Patfoot and Prongs, Cat, Rat and Dog. Cat, Rat and Dog has always been my favorite chapter in this book, and it is really held up.
It's probably the best name of a chapter in any book.
Lightning Struck Tower.
I still like this better.
Yeah. I mean, Cat, Rat and Dog is great, but Lightning Struck Tower is incredible. It's very poetic.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Anyway, let's get back to Snape and Sirius and Lupin's discussion. I don't have anything particularly to add about the discussion itself. So, should we move on to the end of that discussion?
So, I just had one observation. So, Snape says something like, "How I wished I were the person to, like, how, like, I wished that I were the person to catch you." He says something like that to Sirius. And it was very strange for me that he was carrying that amount of vengeance with him, because in real life, you carry that kind of vengeance against someone who's wronged you when they seem to have a better life than you're having. But Sirius, at least according to Snape, from Snape's point of view, Sirius is having the shittiest life possible. He spent 12 years in Azkaban, and his soul was just like it's slowly being sucked out by the Dementors. He's reliving his worst memories, and all of this is happening, and the whole community thinks Sirius Black was colluding with Voldemort, and he betrayed his friends and everything. It's like the worst thing that can happen to someone. How can you, as a person carrying that kind of vengeance towards that person, still not forgive them, or still not be like, okay, they got what they had it coming and they got it? How can you still carry it?
I think the answer to this question contains a lot of spoilers from future books. So if you're just reading the series for the first time, can you just skip ahead by like a couple of minutes? I thought it was really interesting. This particular conversation between Snape, Sirius and Lupin was really interesting because it shows us that Snape basically holds Sirius responsible for Lily's death. He even holds James responsible for Lily's death. It's
a very interesting observation.
He in fact, I think he says something along the lines of, I'm going to refer to the book for this because my memory is not that great. Let's see.
Servant of Lord Voldemort. Right?
Servant of Lord Voldemort. I think he says something along the lines of, you'd have died like your father too. You'd have died like your father, too arrogant to believe you might be mistaken in black.
Very interesting.
And I think that is the core. I mean, Snape, I'm sure Snape does not like. I'm sure Snape didn't like Lupin or Black before any of the events that we know happened, before James and Lily died. But I think over time, Snape has had enough time and energy to dwell on the person who. Snape sacrificed a lot to keep Lily safe, right?
That's true.
He was a double agent. He was with Voldemort but spying on them for Dumbledore. He was willing to do anything to keep Lily safe.
Yeah.
And the person that she trusted the most betrayed them.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the kind of hatred he must have felt in that moment? It also shows us something really interesting that I didn't think about. As in, I'm admitting that it's not a personal thought, it's from Reddit. Thanks, Reddit. It also shows us that Snape is supposed to be in Voldemort's inner circle, but he didn't know that Peter Pettigrew was the informer. He believed the public story that Black is the one who betrayed the group, and he didn't know that Peter Pettigrew is the one who did.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Or maybe it could have just been because Voldemort probably acted as soon as he heard the news.
Maybe, but I think Black mentioned something along the lines of, so he says this as a statement, and he says you can like go ahead and deny it. Like he says, you were passing information to Voldemort for a year before James and Lily were killed.
Correct.
And he says, do you deny that? And Peter Pettigrew does not answer that question. But I don't know why Sirius would definitively make that statement without, and it's such a definite time frame, right? He says a year. He doesn't say, I know you were passing information to Voldemort before. I know that you've always been working for him. He says a year.
Yeah.
And I also wonder if he knows specifically how long Peter was on Voldemort's side because of his time in Azkaban amongst other supporters.
That's possible, but it's also possible that so the conversation they have is something along the lines of Lupin thinks Sirius. So basically, Lupin thinks Sirius was the spy. Sirius initially thought Lupin was the spy. And everybody is like, who's the spy? So that means that maybe for a year before James and Lily's death, they have had problems because someone was passing information.
Yeah.
And they've all wondered who the spy was. And in the end, Sirius, because of Sirius's idea, they just made the spy the secret keeper.
Yeah.
I think it was probably very well known that someone was a spy.
Yeah. But I think that's why Snape is so affected by this interaction with Sirius that their shared history blinds him so much that he won't even accept any other possibility, any other outcome. He's not even pausing to think, why would Sirius Black, James's best friend, who he's known all through his school life, enough, and who do you know better than your bullies, right? So he knows him so well that he's not even pausing to think, what would Sirius Black gain out of being a spy for Voldemort? He doesn't think about it at all. He's ready to believe it.
I think that is there, but I feel like even if he didn't think that Sirius was that closely involved in their death, he would still hate Sirius for the fact that if it hadn't been for Sirius and James and Lupin and the whole group, Lily would have lived.
Yeah.
Like if it hadn't been for James, she would have not fallen in. According to him, she fell in with the wrong. According to him, she fell in with the wrong crowd and got herself killed. And if he probably thinks that if Lily had been with Snape, she would have never died.
Yeah. And I don't think the fact that it was Sirius's idea of switching secret keepers that led to James and Lily's death would endear Sirius to Snape at all.
And also, I think there is just all of these people in the room, other than Ron and Hermione, have the shared past that they are all hurting from. So even if you take Sirius Black also, you would see that he's probably the most emotional only in this chapter. That's because he's talking about how he effectively killed Harry's parents anyway.
Yeah.
He was the reason that they died. And imagine carrying that kind of feelings with you for 12 years in Azkaban, just like reimagining the kind of things that you could have done. Like one misstep and everything went wrong. And Sirius is the kind of person who values friendship above everything else. I think he would not have been this upset if it had been one of his family members. But it was James and it was Lily, and he indirectly or directly betrayed them. And not just that, while he was in Azkaban, he could not even help Harry. Like, he probably heard that Harry was putting himself in dangerous situations, and like people were trying to attack Harry. And being his godfather, he couldn't perform those duties properly. And being just a friend, he could not even perform the duty he could not even extract proper vengeance, because Peter Pettigrew of all people outsmarted him and faked his own death.
Yeah.
So obviously he's going to I think basically the shared past of the shared hurt is just too much. I feel like there is no proper reconciliation for someone who's gone through something so terrible.
I agree.
But yeah, it was a good point about why Snape carried that amount of vengeance with him. And I also like that in spite of all this, even Harry is very worried and scared about Snape, but Hermione speaks up and she's like, what's the harm in listening to them? And obviously Snape is beyond reason, and he's like, for once in your life, hold your tongue.
I know. I mean, Snape's interaction with Harry and Hermione was really scary.
Yeah.
Also, Hermione has had a roller coaster of a year. She leaves a class, she slaps Malfoy, she attacks a teacher,
Yeah.
she questions a teacher, and then she attacks them with a spell. Hermione has come so far in this year. I am really proud of her.
But just before he gets attacked, he tells Harry that you should be thanking me on bended knee.
I know.
It's like, which era do you live in?
Sense of drama has overtaken Snape. You know what I thought was really funny? Snape taught Expelliarmus in the Chamber of Secrets to these guys, and that's the spell they use against him.
Yeah.
Hoisted by Owen Petard.
Yes.
I also thought it was interesting that yet again Harry has to face down a teacher in the climax of a book. He faces down Quirrell in Philosopher's Stone, Lockhart in Chamber of Secrets, and he used to face down Snape in Prisoner of Azkaban. And this is the most emotional and tense showdown, because Quirrell and Lockhart were sort of cartoonish people, but Snape, we have had enough character development over the last 3 books, and there's enough shared history, like you mentioned, for this to be such a emotional tense scene when it happens.
But you know that Harry and Snape showdown happens.
I know, but this is the first version of it.
Yeah,
this is the first time that Harry openly goes against Snape.
Yeah. I think it's so great that they all attack him at the same time, because though it's never said explicitly, it was very obvious that the trio attacked Snape not because he was threatening them with expulsion and suspension. It was because they wanted to do what was right and give someone who spent 12 years in a prison a chance, even though they did not believe him fully at that point. Which was incredibly brave of 3 children. And we know that they are brave, but this feels like a different level of it, because they don't know the story yet, and they see that this person is unreasonable, and at the cost of, they risk everything by doing this. In fact, these guys, Sirius and Lupin, might turn out to be complete frauds, and they might be the ones who actually want to kill Harry. But they risk everything because they know that one of them is being unreasonable, and it's not right that the other doesn't get a fair chance because of it. Which is really cool.
I agree. That is so brave. I didn't think about it like that. I mean, I didn't think about how much they actually risked by cursing a teacher.
Yeah. I think their sense of justice is just amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's after Snape is out cold that Black finally decides to move things along by asking Ron for scabbers. And Ron brings up an excellent point. He's like, how do you know that this is the rat? That is Peter Pettigrew. And honestly, when I was reading it this time, I realized that this is like the mother of all Chekhov. Just like blowing off. Sirius actually found out. I mean, back in chapter 1, we knew Harry receives a clipping of Ron's family trip to Egypt with a picture of the Weasley family, and he says that, hey, you can even see scabbers on Ron's shoulder, and he's really excited to see that, the Weasley family got a windfall. We also find out in chapter 10, the Marauders map, that Fudge recounts a story about visiting Azkaban and seeing Black and seeing him like coherent and cool and asking for his paper to do the crossword. And I realized that that is probably that paper. What a coincidence, honestly. Both of these events being tied back so neatly, it's incredible.
I think in this book, there is no stone left unturned, or like everything, nothing has gone to waste. She's turned everything into something.
I agree. It is insane.
Yeah. So I was wondering if Peter Pettigrew is so clever that he can fake his own death. He can be Voldemort's spy and not be found out at all. He can live as a rat with a wizarding family for so long. And also, he does not have a sense of right and wrong. He has like no morals whatsoever. So why was he not in Slytherin? So I was typing out acting as though I was the first person who ever thought of it, and the Google autocomplete was that, like, why is Peter Pettigrew in Gryffindor? The two answers that were very the two answers on Sci-Fi Stack Exchange that was very satisfactory were, one, the hat makes mistakes, which is okay. I guess it is bound to read one or two people wrong. The second is that the hat puts people in houses based on potential and not based on the current, not based on what they think when they're wearing the hat or whatever, which could be taken in multiple ways. Maybe Peter Pettigrew had the potential of becoming like a brave and a kind and everything that represents Gryffindor basically, but he picked the wrong path by becoming by seeking Voldemort. At the same time, we know that Snape had all the potential of becoming this evil Dark Lord type person. This evil Dark Lord type person, but we know that he's probably the bravest in the whole book. So I feel like the first answer is more satisfying for me. What do you think?
I'm trying to remember Dumbledore's line correctly, so correct me if I'm wrong.
Sometimes we saw too soon.
That, yes. And it's our choices that determine who we are and not our abilities.
Yeah.
So Peter Pettigrew's abilities might have said one thing, but his choices were completely different.
Yeah. It was still interesting though.
Yeah. It really it is definitely something to think about, because when we first encounter the Sorting Hat in the first book, it seems very black and white. The hat reads your mind and it puts you in a house, and you're there for the next 7 years, interacting with like-minded peers and grooming yourself to become the ideal of the house. But we know from Harry that you can choose to be a certain house, and I like that this particular element gets murkier and murkier with every book. Like, nothing is black and white anymore.
So this clearly shows that we should not be putting too much stock into what house a person belongs to. I think a lot of people talk about, including us, we've spoken about how splitting students into groups like that have these rigid kind of rules, or not rules but rigid indicators of who they are, might not be a great idea, and also it's terrible for someone who's sorted in the wrong house like Slytherin. And we talk about it as if it's a bug, but I think it's a feature. I think J.K. Rowling really wants to show that the kind of categorizations that we put other people into, or the categorizations that we are born into, don't always define us. And maybe this is like, I know that we have a sort of like a caste system in Harry Potter because of the mudblood and the blah, blah, because whether they were
Based on the blood.
based on the blood, yeah, we kind of have a caste system, but this is another way of showing it. It's like your differences. People always use the differences to divide people, but at the end of the day, people can surprise you, and they don't have to follow the rigid convention set up by someone many centuries ago.
Yeah, I never really thought about it.
Yeah, me neither. I
on
think
that front.
the more we think about why this person is in a house, I mean, superficially it's fun to think about it, but I feel like that categorization itself is flawed. The Sorting Hat itself says it at one point. It says that it's wondering whether if dividing is the right thing to do, especially in troubled times. So I think that's an important lesson that we should all learn.
I agree. I also really like that particular song of the Sorting Hat. I think it comes in Order of the Phoenix.
Yeah.
One of my favorite Sorting Hat songs.
Yeah.
I think we were discussing how Black found out that Scabbers is Peter Pettigrew. At this point, I would like to dedicate a couple of minutes to Crookshanks, who is the
Unsung hero
of this story. I swear, Crookshanks is so smart. Like, Black himself takes a couple of minutes to talk about how smart Crookshanks is.
Yeah.
Crookshanks stole the passwords from Neville's side table and brought them to Black. First off, Crookshanks understood what Black wanted to do. Crookshanks can read. Crookshanks acts out sophisticated information like Peter faked his own death.
What do you mean? He didn't act that out.
How did Black understand from Crookshanks that Scabbers faked his own death and left blood on the bed sheets?
That death, you mean?
Yeah. How did a cat tell a dog
No,
this
I think-
information?
So I think that what they're trying to say by the whole Animagus thing and like everybody running around with a werewolf and everything is just to showcase that animals can communicate with each other.
No, I understand that, but they are also human beings and animals simultaneously. Crookshanks is an animal. He's not a human being, but he is incredibly smart. He is even a good judge of character because when he sees Peter Pettigrew, he like hisses, and he understood that Black is not a bad person and he's helping Black do so many things. He can understand human language. He understood based on discussions that Scabbers faked his own death and left blood on the bed sheets. This is this incredibly smart cat, and it is such a tragedy that he's not the hero of the story. We should have a spin-off about Crookshanks just solving crimes and helping people along. Like, why didn't J.K. Rowling use Crookshanks more in the other books?
Because then
He could have been a spy.
it would become about Crookshanks.
What's wrong with that? Crookshanks in the Order of the Phoenix has a nice ring to it.
I think that that is an incredibly clever cat. And it is true. It's so obvious that Sirius is so fond of Crookshanks. I'm just sad that they never interact with each other after this.
I know, that is incredibly, incredibly sad.
Yeah.
Also, I think the most apt description of how I felt the first time I read these chapters is written by J.K. Rowling herself. Harry's brain seemed to be sagging under the weight of what he was hearing.
I cannot believe this. This is the exact point I've written at the exact same time. I was just about to say it.
She's a phenomenal writer, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, there is so much. And I also like how they piece all this information together. I think they ask the Hermione and Harry and Ron ask the right questions, display the right emotions to bring out the maximum amount of information possible from Lupin and Sirius. It's just so cool, the coming together of information.
Yeah, and I like that it's done in a completely natural manner and not infodump for the sake of infodump.
Yeah.
Like, people are taking time to process, think about questions. And I really appreciate the use of Hermione as a... if we can assume that Harry is the audience substitute, if we can assume that Harry is the audience substitute, Hermione is clearly the super reader substitute, because Hermione quickly processes events and immediately asks questions. She asks questions that the readers want to know, that Harry might not be thinking about at the moment because he's reeling from the weight of the information he's hearing, right? But there is Hermione asking questions like, how did you get out of Azkaban? How did you know that?
Scabbers is this. That Ron asked that question. No?
Yes.
Scabbers is the same.
But I think she asks another question as well. Wait, I've written this down. Why didn't Pettigrew try to kill Harry before, even though he's been in the dormitory for the last couple of years? So I love that she has mapped out these interactions so well that they've stayed true to the characters as well.
Yeah. And I think she also acts like a moderator by the end of it, where she's like, okay, let's try to bring out all the information so that we have, or at least Harry has all the information at hand before he's making a decision. Which is, any decision he makes is going to be terrible. If he decides that Sirius is wrong and Sirius is probably the one to blame, Sirius dies. If he decides that Pettigrew is the one to blame, Pettigrew dies. And I feel like Hermione acts as this kind of a person who's like, okay, how do we make it easy on Harry?
Yeah, I agree. She does an incredible job as a moderator.
Yeah.
Also, at this point, I'd like to mention that the Marauder's backstory is so tragic. It has the hallmark of all good tragedies: friendship, betrayal, switcheroos, and werewolves. Everything that can go wrong goes wrong. I mean, the more we find out about the Marauders' lives, the more you realize that it's just one giant tragedy with every possible thing in there.
Yeah. And as soon as they convert, as soon as they force Peter Pettigrew to show himself, the conversation that comes out is just has so much weight. Like, I think the whole, I feel like the environment just changes. It's already tense and it's already like revelations after revelations, but there's so much depth and sadness to it once he comes in, because it feels like Sirius becomes the person who, like, Sirius sheds all his inhibitions. He's more free. He's crying. He's yelling, and it's cathartic for him, right?
Yeah.
To finally to have suspected this for so long, and to finally see it happening, it's just, I cannot even imagine.
I wonder if the reason that Sirius gets so emotional after they force Scabbers to become Peter Pettigrew is that a part of him might have doubted it all this time.
Yeah.
And maybe this is just a madman's delusion, and he escaped from Azkaban, stalked Harry around Hogwarts trying to get this rat all this time, and he might have worried that at the crucial moment it could just be a rat, it could not be Peter Pettigrew, and he would still be responsible for James and Lily's deaths. And
one more thing which was very interesting to me is he doesn't really hold Pettigrew responsible for his Azkaban stay at all.
Yeah,
that's beyond that. He doesn't even care about it. He only talks about what did Peter Pettigrew have in him that made him betray James and Lily, which was very incredible because he did not care about himself at that point. And he even says, I would have died before I would have betrayed them. And when Peter whimpers and says Voldemort would have killed him, Sirius just says, then you should have died.
Yeah. I think it just goes to show that Sirius values friendship more than everything else, including his own life.
Yeah.
And the fact that other people can exist and not do the same thing, I think really baffles him. I love these conversations that they have. Like you said, they carry so much of depth of feeling. Like when Sirius says, then you should have died. Or like when Lupin says, you should have realized that if Voldemort didn't kill you, we would. Yeah, it's such, like, every line hurts. Like when the three of them talk and Lupin and Sirius are just talking about things that happened, every line hurts because you can feel like the burden of history like just bearing down on these characters and them realizing all those mistakes that they made not trusting each other so many years ago.
Exactly.
If Sirius had trusted Lupin, and at that point things might have been different.
Yeah. And it's also they don't say much about what happened, but it paints a very clear picture. We understand the intentions that Peter Pettigrew had, because Sirius understands the intentions. Sirius says you always wanted like bigger friends than you, someone who you can hide behind, someone more powerful. So in the school, that was us. Like we were the biggest bullies, or I guess bullies. But then once you got out of school, you saw a bigger bully and you hid behind him. And he says this line, which I thought was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
It must have been the finest moment of your miserable life, telling Voldemort you could hand him the Potters. Just that line, and you can see Peter Pettigrew doing that.
Yeah. Sirius does really take over for Pettigrew in this chapter, huh? He basically defines his motivations, the backstory, everything. And you could think that, hey, Peter Pettigrew isn't doing anything to deny what Sirius says, but he also can't do anything to confirm what Sirius says, because at this point, Peter Pettigrew is just concerned with making sure that he survives this interaction.
And he escapes. So because he's so rat-like even when he's not a rat. He's constantly looking at the doors and the windows and trying to, form a path for him to escape.
When we were doing the prep for this episode, I was telling Prashani that this particular thing about Pettigrew really reminded me of Parasite. So I watched Parasite, the movie, only last night. So it's like really fresh in my memory. And I realized that Peter Pettigrew, like you mentioned, is a adult man who's lived with a wizarding family for the last 12 years. And they didn't know that a man was living there. I wonder if he transformed from a rat to a man to retain like his senses every now and then. And these people did not know. He was in their home. He was in Ron's bed. Poor Ron. Poor Ron.
So by the end of this chapter, Harry observes that Ron is probably taking this whole revelation as a personal insult. And that reminded me that we always talk about how being around Harry is just harmful for so many people, especially the Weasleys, because they keep getting into trouble with Ginny in the second year and Ron's parents and everyone. But what we are forgetting to see is how much trouble people around Harry are causing for him, directly or indirectly. So for example, I have some notes here. Yeah. Ron's pet being a murderer, and Hagrid revealing information about Fluffy to a random hooded stranger in a pub. Ginny passing information about Harry to Voldemort's memory. There's so many ways in which Harry's friends and like his friends' family cause him harm. And it's incredible that Harry still chooses to trust people instead of just like not trusting anyone.
I agree. I never really thought about that. I mean, I think we've discussed a little bit about Harry's impact on the people around him, but we haven't seen how the people around him have also really impacted his life. But Harry at no point accuses them or feels betrayed.
Yeah. I think the only way this can be seen is it's not Harry's fault or his friend's fault or whatever. It's someone out there who wants to manipulate someone else for their own gains. I think Harry has the maturity to see it right away and not question his friends too much, which is really cool.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. I actually have a point to make. I know we've discussed quite a bit about J.K. Rowling's writing in this particular episode, but I really enjoyed this line. I'm gonna refer to the book really quickly. I think here it is. Well, hello, Peter, said Lupin pleasantly, as though rats frequently erupted into old school friends around him. Long time no see. What a great line.
Yeah, thought the same thing.
Yeah.
And I think apart from all this, Sirius reveals that he escapes Azkaban by turning into a dog, and looks like Dementors are not great at detecting animals' feelings. And
didn't you think all of the information that Sirius reveals about Dementors was really fascinating?
Yeah.
So he says that Dementors can't see, they can feel their way towards people by sensing their emotions. making them like really unique creatures. I know we've discussed Dementors in the past, but this particular facet of their personalities makes me wonder, how do Dementors communicate, and how do they understand other people's communication, and it also makes them incredibly cruel jailers.
Yeah, of course.
The person who first thought that Dementors should be the guardians of a prison was really cruel.
And it's also telling that he says once he transformed into a dog, the Dementors didn't really think much of it, because everybody's mental abilities and feelings reduce over time when they're in Azkaban, and that's just a natural progression.
Yeah. There are a lot of really sad moments for Sirius in this chapter.
So
The
if
line
I can
where
just say this thing, like by the
Yeah,
end of
sorry.
it, he says something like, as a dog, he swam across the ocean, and then he lived in the forest for a while, and then he came out to see Harry playing Quidditch. I can just imagine, the way Sirius, even as a dog, would have caught wind of Harry playing Quidditch, and then he being compelled to watch it, and then like resurfacing and realizing that he flew as well as his father. He must have seen James playing Quidditch over there, James flying. And again, it's so sad.
Oh my god. I feel really bad for Sirius
I know.
in this chapter.
Yeah.
I mean, just even like the small interactions just show us how much life in Azkaban has damaged him. When Hermione calls him Mr. Black, there is a line that says, Black stared at Hermione as though being spoken to politely was something he'd long forgotten. It's just so tragic. And also this particular moment, right, at the end of this, he look at Harry, and I really like, I don't know why those sentences, they're very straightforward, they're very simple, but they really hit like straight to the heart type of thing, where he just says, he looked at Harry, who did not look away.
I know what line you're talking about, though.
Like, I never betrayed James and Lily. I would have died before I betrayed them.
Believe me, he says.
Yeah. And then the conclusion is, and at long last, Harry believed him. Like, it is that simple. Like,
And even that line that follows, where Pettigrew breaks down as if the nod was his death sentence, that was also so cool. It's a cool bit of writing.
yeah, Pettigrew's pleas to each party member there and their replies sort of feel like dramatic effect, but are really indicative of their characters. Because when he turns to Lupin and he says, like, hey, we were friends and I was scared, Lupin's just like, like, sucks to be you type of sentiment.
And I think the order in which he tries to approach them is also really cool. He first reminds his old friends and appeals to their heart using principles of friendship. But when that doesn't work, he appeals to another friend and owner of sorts, which is Ron, who doesn't really listen to him either. Then he goes to Hermione, who has nothing to do with any of this. And then at long last, he goes to Harry, because he is the person who was most affected by Peter Pettigrew. But Peter Pettigrew doesn't have any shame, obviously, does not have any guilt, does not think whatever he did was wrong. He's willing to grovel his way out of this. He's willing to survive no matter at what cost, and that puts him like in the other end of the spectrum. Like everybody else other than Peter Pettigrew in that room would have rather died. I mean, they would have never done the same mistake, or they would have never taken the dark side. But it's just such a big contrast. And it's like Black says, it's very surprising that he didn't see through Peter Pettigrew much earlier than when he did.
I think
And he, like Peter Pettigrew, again, like Black says, Peter Pettigrew is a much better rat than a human.
such a killer line. So far in the Harry Potter series, I think we've seen one kind of bad guy, right? Like a straight up baddie who wants power and is willing to do anything to get it, like people like Voldemort and like Lucius Malfoy. But Peter Pettigrew is our first introduction to a more ambiguous kind of villain, a coward who betrays his closest friends, either out of fear. I think he says something along the lines of he was taking over everywhere. What was there to be gained from refusing him? Or coercion. He says he has weapons you can't imagine. So he switched sides, air quotes for sides. He switched sides to side with the megalomaniac, right? In some ways, I think that as children, especially, we are able to understand straight up bad people more because they have a strong motivation. But people like Peter Pettigrew are actually more villainous than people like Voldemort.
Yeah. And it's honestly disgusting.
It is really disgusting because he could be anyone he looked out only for himself. He didn't care about anybody else. He didn't care about a cause. He didn't care about a conflict. He cared about only his own skin. And that's what makes him so despicable and villainous.
I guess that's what I was trying to say. He is probably the only person who puts himself first. The basically, sorry. I guess that's what I was going to say. He is probably the most selfish of the whole lot there.
Yeah, he is. I also wonder what Voldemort could have offered him to convert him a full year before his downfall.
I think he's just making it up. I feel like he would have seeked Voldemort out.
Maybe we don't really know the answer to this. I think maybe we'll find out in the following books as we read it.
I feel like we should just go with Sirius's judgment because Sirius says that he follows anyone who's more powerful. So I don't think Voldemort had to offer much.
Maybe he didn't. Yeah, I don't know. When I was thinking about this, I realized that Voldemort, if he had been the one to approach Pettigrew, is a really accurate judge of character. He's able to spy a group, find a weak link, and just infiltrate.
I just cannot imagine that happening. I feel like in all my, no matter what possibility, it feels like Peter Pettigrew would have approached Voldemort.
I don't know why I'm not convinced of that entirely. I don't know what is stopping me from completely believing you. It just feels like I'm missing some information. Like a part of my brain's like no, but it's not able to actually find the reasoning for why it is saying no. So I will go back and do some Googling and then we'll talk about this later, I guess. I will add this to the episode notes section. I want to do a callback to a point that you made a couple of episodes ago about Harry not being a killer. Yeah. I think we were talking about what were we talking about?
We were talking about the first book.
Yes, we were talking about Quirrell and how the movie takes away that particular trait of Harry's. Like he kills Quirrell
intentionally. Like he knows that his hand has something that burns Quirrell and he puts it on Quirrell. But in the book he doesn't do it. Quirrell tries to get a hold of Harry and burns himself. And we know that this character that Harry has is the reason Sirius lives.
Yeah. And it's also the same reason that Peter Pettigrew lives. Because Harry stops Lupin and Black from killing Pettigrew, not out of mercy or pity, but because he thinks his dad wouldn't have wanted his best friends to become killers because of Peter. Also, Lupin and Black were ready to straight up kill someone in front of 3 13-year-olds.
Can't think about that right now.
Different times.
Yeah.
Different times.
I also feel like they are doing it for Harry. I feel like they thought Harry would want that.
And I think the moment where Harry says no really shocks them. I also wonder if they got carried away. Harry looks so much like James.
Yeah.
And I wonder if they got carried away thinking this is what James would have wanted. And they maybe even thought of Harry as just a substitute for James. But Harry is his own person. And he puts himself forward at the right moment to stop them.
I think this becomes a conflict later, which it's a very interesting conflict that happens in the 5th book, no?
Yes.
I really like that bit.
Yeah, me too.
Because everyone, even Peter Pettigrew tells Harry that he looks like his father.
Yes.
And Sirius like, how dare you talk to him? How dare you talk about James in front of him?
I know. How dare he? You betrayed him. They died because of you directly.
That's what. I think there is no point in just yelling at him because he's not going to realize anything.
Yeah, like you said, he has no sense of, he has no morality. He has no, uh, he has no cause. He has nothing. He's just out for himself.
There is just no way to make him feel bad about anything.
Yeah.
So what they do is they strap Peter Pettigrew to Lupin and Ron, and to just make sure he doesn't escape or transform, because they issue threats that if he transforms, Harry agrees to kill him, and they all like shuffle out of the out of Shrieking Shack.
Yeah. That is chapter 20, The Dementor's Kiss. There is a switch in the way Harry views Sirius Black in this chapter. Till the last end of the last chapter, in the last paragraph also, he's referred to as Black. But from in this chapter, he becomes Sirius.
Wow, I didn't notice this.
Yeah.
Oh,
He is no longer Black. He's now Sirius to Harry.
It just makes the following thing so sad.
Yeah. And honestly, Harry's happiness at finding out that Sirius wants Harry to live with him once he's free always gets to me. I've never forgotten the lightness I also felt along with Harry the first time I read this book. That Harry is free, he can leave the Dursleys. It felt like, the world was opening up with opportunities. That the subsequent letdown was so horrible. Like, I have never forgotten that sense of feeling wronged.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, I'm sure I felt the same way, but you're right. I think it's not just about Harry. We readers would have felt the same thing.
Yeah, because Harry is finally free from the Dursleys, or so we thought, right? And this book is the first book that doesn't tie itself up neatly. It doesn't follow through on its promises. Good people don't win. Good people don't get what they want. And that's how the world works.
In fact, if Sirius had stayed put, none of the other books would have happened.
Yeah. And they might not have happened in the same way. Actually, if it weren't for the events of this particular chapter, they might not happen in the same way. I'm a big believer in the whole thing that there is a linchpin. There isn't a particular linchpin alone. Like, it might not have happened in this way, but it would have happened through a different set of events, maybe with a longer timeline or a shorter timeline. Voldemort coming back is heavily dependent on this chapter, but I think Voldemort would have come back one way or another. And Pettigrew is definitely the direct cause of everything that happens after this book. And you were right. If Lupin hadn't been there, things would be very different. Because the minute that this group edges out and Sirius and Harry are having this incredibly heartbreaking conversation.
And what was so heartbreaking about that was, I think this was the first time Harry's vocalizing how happy he would be if he were not living with Dursleys. I don't think he's ever said it to anyone, not even to his friends.
I also thought it was really delightful that Harry's second thought is telling the Dursleys that he's going to go live with the convict from the television.
Yeah.
Harry is awesome. Yeah. And they're edging out, and tragedy strikes 3 times. Actually 4 if you think about it. The first one is, it's the full moon. Lupin hasn't taken the potion that Snape bought him. Strike 2, when Lupin is transforming into a werewolf and Sirius has to deal with this, Pettigrew manages to get Lupin's wand and hurt Ron and poor Crookshanks.
Because Crookshanks, I felt the same way, and I was like, why would he do that? Because Crookshanks can track him down.
Yes, he hurts, and Pettigrew really acts really fast. He hurts Ron and Crookshanks and he makes an escape. Did Pettigrew need a wand to transform all these years? To transform? I don't know.
Yeah,
I
don't know.
I don't know enough about animagus to answer that question. Also, did you think it was interesting that Harry uses Expelliarmus to stop him? He tries to get the wand away from Pettigrew.
Yeah.
But it's too late. Pettigrew transforms.
He doesn't try to stop him. He tries to get the wand away. That's what it is.
If Harry had used the hex, if Harry had used anything else at that point, instead of
getting...
No. It just feels like the spell that, it's Expelliarmus can be used for multiple purposes, but it really is Harry's spell, right? Harry has used it in so many situations, and over the years uses it in so many more situations, that I feel like this is the biggest letdown.
Harry's like this elderly uncle. He's like, okay, you're going to hurt yourself, just give it to me. Before you hurt yourself or me, just give your wand, give your magic away. It's okay. He doesn't want to do anything else.
Yeah. and Harry's trying to deal with this moment, and Lupin runs away into the forest, thankfully. So Sirius
Thanks to Sirius.
Thanks to Sirius. Sirius is bleeding and he has wounds in his back. But the minute that Harry says, "Look, Pettigrew's escaped," Sirius just runs straight off because he knows his entire freedom depends on them having Pettigrew.
And the whole reason he escaped was Pettigrew.
Yeah. And then there's like strike 3. The Dementors find Sirius. And Harry knows the Patronus charm, but there are so many Dementors. And it's just him and Sirius and Hermione. And Sirius and Hermione are overcome by the onslaught of Dementors there. So he's trying to do the Patronus charm, but the memories that he summons, the memory of thinking that I have a godfather and I'm going to leave the Dursleys forever, is not strong enough for him to sustain his Patronus.
I think it's strong. It's just too many Dementors.
Yeah, that leads us to strike 3.5. Harry finds out what is in the hood.
Yeah, it's like even
He
that
knows-
bracket is closed now because he
Yes.
is the one who asks what's
Yes.
under the hood.
Yeah, and he finds out what's under the hood. And this illustration in Jim Kay's Harry Potter edition, which I will now show you, and the video, I guess. Yay, I'm so glad we are doing this.
Oh. Whoa, that's really disturbing.
Guys, please buy this book.
That's a disgusting head. That's incredible.
Guys, please buy this book. It's really worth it. So Harry
It's
finds
less
out.
slimy than I thought. It's just sheer scary.
Yeah, it is some really scary stuff. This actually reminds me of a Doctor Who villain. They sort of look. I think they're called the Silence. They sort of look like this. Yeah, really freaky stuff. And that brings us to strike 4. The Dementors are supposed to perform the kiss only on Sirius, and they get really excited and they try to perform the kiss on Harry also.
Because they are like, we should take him out first.
Yeah,
Because he keeps trying to stop us.
I guess. But a Patronus appears out of nowhere, conjured by someone who looks familiar to Harry. But Harry can't believe it's them, and then he passes out. The turn of events in this chapter for a person with a more delicate constitution would have been too much to bear. I know, you go all the way from Harry is going to leave the Dursleys and live with his godfather, his dad's best friend, and to
Harry's almost kissed by a Dementor.
yes, this is a tragic series of events.
You know, another really tiny thing that that happens that I want to call out is as soon as Lupin transforms into a werewolf, Sirius says, "Run now," and Harry's like, "Well, I can't run because Ron is strapped to Peter Pettigrew. I can't run without him." Just like it's said. It's not even said. He thinks that in a very matter of fact way, and I was like, "Wow."
Yeah. Seriously. These things, this chapter happens really, really quickly.
I mean, there's not a lot of. I think when I was reading it for the first time, when they came out of the Shrieking Shack, I thought the book was over. I
Okay.
really did not expect the turn of events. Especially Lupin. I mean, what other foreshadowing can they do? They even talk. Snape even says he brought the potion to
Yeah.
Lupin's study.
But I had honestly forgotten it. Thanks to all the things we find out over the last couple of chapters, I had forgotten that it was a full moon and that Snape brought the potion to Lupin's study. That this chapter really surprised me. And I agree with you. I think in a children's book, the minute they come out of the Shrieking Shack and they go, this feels like a Famous Five adventure till then. Like, the Famous Five take everybody to the police and they're done, and then they go home and they have hot cocoa and scones or whatever it is that they eat. But this is where it really takes the leap from a children's book to an adult's book.
Well, the past with James and Lily was not very children's booky.
The past can be painful, but
The ending of this current book.
no, what I was trying to say was the past can be painful and it can be filled with wrongs. But as kids, we have this belief that if we try hard enough, things will be okay. And that if we go to the right people, there's a sense of fairness that kids expect from the world around them. And that's given to kids, this right to expect this fairness by parents who make everything fair. When you have squabbles at home, they're judged fairly. When you're at school,
Right
you're
to
judged.
at least.
When you're at school, there's a sense there is a sense of fairness. And Finding out that the world isn't fair is when you stop being a kid.
Wow, that's really deep for 5 o'clock in the evening.
And this book, that's why I think I know that, you know, finding out all that stuff about James and Lily and Sirius and Lupin and all of, you know, the tragic potential of their lives and how it was wasted, all of that is really bad. But to a kid, it's like it's over. And then this is the point in the movies where you're like, okay, you know, like we've got the bad guy and the bad guy is going to die now, or the bad guy is going to fall off a cliff, or, you know, get arrested by the police and then go away forever, or the bad guy is going to like repent and become a good guy. None of those things happen.
Yeah, this bad guy directly goes to start the plot for the next book.
Yeah. That's just how life works.
And Professor Trelawney's prediction kind of comes true.
Yes. Which
And
Harry
we-
doesn't realize at this moment.
Yeah, obviously, we don't realize it either. We kind of forgot.
Yes. Because of all the things that
Yeah.
happened over the last
If we
couple of
remembered that
episodes.
prediction, we would have known that Peter Pettigrew was going to escape.
Yeah.
We
Which-
didn't. Yeah, we didn't.
So J.K. Rowling did arm us with all the information necessary. It's just we
I think we all really, 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 really hoped that it wouldn't happen.
from stories we expect things to be from stories we expect order, and we expect things that are not in the world to be in them, right? We expect fairness, we expect order, we expect justice. And a lot of the times writers give that to us because we don't get that in the real world. We might as well pretend we're getting that in this imaginary world, right? But this book is so effective, and I think the real reason that Prisoner of Azkaban is my favorite book in the whole series is because of this particular moment. It really feels like this is sort of the making of adult Aishwarya. This book kickstarted that process, and the other books that followed are in a similar vein. When I think about the books that defined my childhood, I think about the Harry Potter series for sure, for showing me, you know, like so many cool, great lessons, like yes, friendship and bravery and cleverness and all those things, but also showing me that life is not necessarily fair. You might not get what you want, all of those things. And books like the Bartimaeus series, Ptolemy's Gate, is like unbelievable, like kick in the butt about life. And Anne of Green Gables. And so I like these books because they are books written for children that don't really sugarcoat the world. They're still optimistic, but they don't sugarcoat anything.
I think some of the best children's stories can actually be considered adult stories. Like they are not children's story at all because they have themes that are I think the best children's story actually have adult themes. Oh, the power went off.
Yeah.
We don't have any reliability on power, right?
No.
Okay. The best kind of children's stories are the ones that take an adult theme and breaks it down in such a way that children can understand it.
I agree. I also think that when people write children's stories, sometimes they get confused and they think that children just don't see the things that are wrong in the world. The thing is, children see them and they just process it differently. The best children's authors understand that. The children just process it differently and they break it down in the way that children understand. Children aren't stupid. They know that things like death are out there. They just accept it differently.
I guess that brings us to the end of today's episode
Thank you for listening.
and watching. If you like this version of the podcast, if you like listening to it, if you think we can improve, please let us know in the comment section. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel to get notifications whenever we post a video.
You can also subscribe to our audio podcast using any of your favorite podcasting apps. We are available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Stitcher, whatever is your game, we're there.
And you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. We are at Mimblewimble Pod at both places. And you can follow me and Aishwarya and I on social media as well. On Twitter, Aishwarya is at Valley_Chim and I am at _Empress. All the links will be in the descriptions below.
You can also visit our website, mimblewimble.in, if you want to give us feedback or
just want to have a discussion with us on like something we spoke about during the episode.
I think that's it.
Cool.
Yay, we did it.
Yes, the first time.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, we'll see you in the next episode.
Until then.